My father said if I didn't break up with my black boyfriend, I was dead to him. My father froze my college fund and told me to find a new place to live when I said I wouldn't break up with Micah. I just turned 18 and had no idea how I was going to survive. When Micah's car pulled up, Dad screamed, "You walk out that door with him and you're giving up everything." I left anyway. Micah kept telling me he would understand if I broke up with him if this was too much, but I wasn't going back. 6 months later, I was living above a Chinese restaurant with Micah, working 3 jobs and painting every morning before my coffee shop shift, trying to make it at the art career my parents had never let me pursue. My sister Sophie secretly texted that Dad told everyone at the country club I was studying abroad, instead of admitting his daughter was waiting tables and living with a black man. Some nights I'd cry in the restaurant bathroom during my shift because I missed my mom's voice and the way she used to bring me tea when I painted late at night, even though she hated my art. I'd scroll through old family photos on my phone until Micah would gently take it away and remind me they chose their prejudice over their daughter. The hardest part was Thanksgiving when Sophie sent a photo of the family dinner with my empty chair still at the table and Mom crying into her napkin while Dad carved the turkey, like nothing was wrong. I painted that empty chair over and over until one morning I woke up to find my Instagram had exploded overnight because some influencer shared that exact painting about conditional love, and suddenly I had 10,000 followers wanting to buy prints. Within 3 weeks, I quit 2 of my jobs because I was making more from art than I'd ever made serving coffee, and every piece was about choosing love over blood that comes with terms and conditions attached. A New York collector saw my work at a small gallery and bought everything for $30,000 cash, then said she wanted to represent me exclusively through her Manhattan gallery. I called my mother from the gallery bathroom and left a voicemail telling her about the sale, but the number was disconnected and Sophie texted that Dad made her get a new phone so I couldn't corrupt her with my lifestyle choices. 6 months later, my first solo show sold out opening night for $200,000 with celebrities fighting over pieces about breaking free from golden cages. The journalist from Art Forum asked if my father had seen my success, and I told her he'd rather tell people I was dead than admit his daughter was dating a black man and thriving without his money. She printed that quote in huge letters across the magazine cover with a photo of Micah and me kissing at the gallery opening, and Sophie said, "Dad destroyed every copy at the country club before anyone could see it." Then Sophie called crying at 2 in the morning saying, "The FBI raided our childhood home and arrested our father for tax evasion and money laundering through his construction company. Apparently, he'd been hiding millions offshore while claiming losses domestically for over a decade, and someone had finally reported him to the authorities with a folder full of evidence. The government seized everything, including the house and cars, and my mother's jewelry, while she moved in with her sister, claiming she knew nothing about any of it. But they were all being investigated heavily. And if I'd stayed in the family, I would have been too. Instead, I was the only one untouched by the scandal. Dad was looking at 15 years minimum. 3 weeks later, my father showed up at my gallery opening in a wrinkled suit that smelled like whiskey and desperation, begging for $200,000 for legal fees. "You're my daughter and family helps family no matter what happened between us," he said, grabbing my hands while everyone watched. I pulled away and reminded him he'd literally changed the locks while I was at school the day after I chose Micah over his racism. "I was protecting you from making the biggest mistake of your life," he hissed as the crowd pulled out phones to record the scene. Micah appeared beside me, and my father's face turned purple with rage at seeing us together in this space where I'd succeeded without him. "Funny how I'm only your daughter when you need money, but I was dead to you when I needed a father who loved me," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. Behind us hung my biggest painting showing a black hand and white hand breaking free from golden chains that spelled out the word family in my mother's perfect cursive handwriting. "You ungrateful little brat. I gave you everything and this is how you repay me," my father screamed while security started moving toward us. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises and leaned in close with spit flying from his mouth. "When I get out of prison, I'm going to make you regret ever choosing that boy over your real family," he whispered with pure hatred in his eyes. The guards dragged him away, but not before he screamed one last thing that made everyone in the gallery freeze completely. "Tell your boyfriend to watch his back because I still have friends who handle problems like him for the right price." I grabbed Micah's hand, suddenly terrified, requested, "Reds is on Spotify now, check out link in the description or comments." Security rushed us toward the back exit while everyone in the gallery stood frozen. People held up their phones recording everything. Gabriella appeared beside us, already talking fast into her phone in Italian. She switched to English saying she needed help right away. The guards pushed us through a door into a hallway I'd never seen before. My hands shook so bad I could barely walk straight. Micah kept his arm around me as we followed Gabriella down the narrow corridor. Behind us I could still hear my father, yelling, even though the guards had dragged him outside. We ended up in Gabriella's office behind the gallery, where she handed me a glass of water. My whole body was shaking and I spilled water on my dress. She pulled up security footage on her computer and started typing notes about what just happened. She said we needed to document everything tonight while it was fresh. She made a list of every person who filmed the incident on their phones. At least 12 people had their cameras out when my father grabbed me. She called her assistant and told her to get contact info from everyone who witnessed what happened. Micah sat next to me holding my hand while we watched the security footage play back. You could see my father's face twisted with rage. As he screamed about Micah, the camera caught him grabbing my wrist and leaning in close to threaten me. It showed the exact moment he yelled about having friends who would handle problems. Gabriella saved multiple copies of the footage to different drives and emailed them to herself. She said this was evidence we'd need for the police. Micah suggested we shouldn't go home tonight since my father knew where we lived. I hadn't even thought about that, but he was right. My father knew our apartment above the Chinese restaurant. Gabriella recommended a hotel with good security and a doorman who wouldn't let anyone up without calling first. She made the reservation herself and paid for 3 nights up front. She said she'd bill it to the gallery as a security expense. She gave us the room number and told us to use fake names at check-in. Then she called someone named Christopher Bowers, who she said was the best lawyer for harassment cases. She put him on speaker and he agreed to meet us first thing in the morning. He told us to write down everything we remembered about what my father said and did. He said to be as specific as possible about the exact words he used. He told us to save any messages or calls we got about the incident. My phone started buzzing, non-stop with notifications. Messages from reporters and art bloggers flooded my inbox asking for comments. Strangers who saw videos online were messaging me on every platform. Some messages were supportive, but others were nasty and threatening. One said I deserved whatever happened for betraying my family. Another said mixed couples like us were ruining America. I screenshot the threatening ones before blocking the numbers. There were already 3 different videos of the incident trending on social media. People were arguing in the comments about whether I was wrong to refuse my father money. Sophie texted me that our father was already at the country club bar telling his version. She said he claimed I provoked him and that he never actually threatened anyone. Mom was backing him up and telling people the videos were edited to make him look bad. Sophie said they were both drunk and getting louder as more people asked questions. She was scared to leave because Dad kept watching her. She said she'd try to slip out later and call me. Gabriella drove us to the hotel herself instead of letting us take a cab. She said we couldn't be too careful right now. The hotel was fancy with marble floors and security cameras everywhere. The doorman took our fake names without asking questions. Our room was on the 10th floor with a view of the city lights. Gabriella stayed for an hour helping us make lists of everything that happened. She wrote down the timeline starting from when my father first appeared at the gallery. We tried to remember every word he said and every person who saw it happen. She said she'd have her assistant pull the full guest list from tonight. Most of them were art collectors and journalists who'd want to help. She left around midnight after making sure we had everything we needed. Micah and I sat on the bed staring at each other in shock. Neither of us could believe this was really happening. We ordered room service, but couldn't eat much. I kept checking the door locks and looking out the peephole. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Micah pulled the curtains closed and turned on the TV for background noise. We tried to sleep, but I kept having nightmares about my father breaking down the door. Christopher called at 7 in the morning to confirm our meeting at 9. His office was in a tall building downtown with security guards in the lobby. He was younger than I expected with kind eyes and a calm voice. He explained how restraining orders worked and what counted as criminal threats under the law. He said my father's specific words about having friends who would handle problems qualified as credible threats. The fact that he said it in front of witnesses and on camera made our case strong. He started filing paperwork for an emergency protective order that day. We spent the afternoon gathering video files from gallery guests who recorded the incident. Gabriella's assistant contacted everyone on the guest list, and 12 people sent their footage. They all agreed to provide witness statements about what they saw and heard. Some of them were big names in the art world who were disgusted by my father's behavior. Gabriella drafted a public statement for me that acknowledged the incident without giving too many details. She said we needed to control the narrative before speculation got out of hand. She posted it on the gallery's social media saying we were cooperating with law enforcement. That evening, back at the hotel, Micah and I had our first real fight about what to do next. He wanted us to leave the city for a while until things calmed down. He said we could stay with his cousin upstate where my father couldn't find us. I refused to let my father drive me away from the life I'd built. We'd worked too hard to run away now. This was my career and my home, and I wasn't giving it up. Micah said I wasn't taking the threat seriously enough. I said he was letting my father win by being scared. We went to bed angry for the first time since we'd been together. Christopher's call woke us up at 7 sharp, saying we needed to get to the police station immediately to file an official report before my father could twist the story. Micah drove us downtown while I clutched the folder of screenshots and witness contact information we'd gathered. The precinct smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. We waited 40 minutes on hard plastic chairs before an officer finally called us back. She looked bored while taking down basic information. Until Christopher pulled up the first video on his phone. Her whole body went rigid watching my father grab my wrist, and hearing his voice say those exact words about having friends who would handle problems. She called her supervisor immediately. 3 more officers crowded around the computer screen watching all 12 videos while I filled out forms with shaking hands. They made copies of everything and had me write down every single word I remembered my father saying. The supervisor kept asking if I felt I was in immediate danger. Christopher handled most of the talking while I signed papers and tried not to throw up from nerves. They gave us a case number and said a detective would be assigned within 48 hours. Back at our apartment, I couldn't stop checking the locks. 3 days later, a car backfired on the street and I dropped to the floor gasping for air. My chest felt crushed and I couldn't breathe right. Micah sat with me on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes talking me through breathing exercises he Googled on his phone. We both knew I needed professional help. Christopher started the protective order paperwork that afternoon in his office. He explained the process would take several weeks minimum, but our video evidence made the case strong. He filed everything electronically while I sat there numbly signing wherever he pointed. 2 days later, Detective Marlene Holmes called. She'd reviewed all our evidence and took the threat seriously, especially with my father's federal charges pending. She said the specific words about having people handle Micah counted as a credible threat of violence. She wanted to meet in person to discuss safety planning. Micah spent the weekend installing new deadbolts on our door. We got a doorbell camera that sent alerts to our phones and a security camera for the hallway. The hardware store clerk helped us pick motion sensor lights for the fire escape. Gabriella had her security company upgrade the gallery's whole system. She hired 2 additional guards for any events where I'd be present. She even changed the back entrance code and limited access to essential staff only. Sophie called Sunday night sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Our father was demanding she go on social media defending him and calling me a liar. She was terrified of losing her trust fund, but more terrified of what he might actually do to us. She wanted to give a statement to the police about his past threats, but needed time to think. Monday morning, I met Delphine Aris for my first therapy session. Her office had soft lighting and plants everywhere. She asked me to describe the gallery incident in detail while she took notes. She explained that my body's fear response was normal after experiencing a direct threat. She taught me a grounding technique where I named 5 things I can see, 4 I can touch, 3 I can hear, 2 I can smell, and 1 I can taste. We practiced it 3 times until my hands stopped shaking. She said hypervigilance was my brain trying to protect me, but we needed to find ways to feel safe without constant panic. We scheduled twice weekly sessions. Tuesday afternoon, Gabriella called furious. Some gossip blog had completely twisted my words, claiming I said all white families were racist. The hate mail started flooding my gallery inbox within hours. People called me reverse racist and said I deserved whatever my father did to me. Gabriella and Christopher worked all night drafting a correction with the actual transcript from the art forum interview. Most legitimate outlets updated their stories, but the damage was spreading through social media. Wednesday evening, Micah was scrolling Instagram when his face went pale. Someone had sent him a direct message from an anonymous account with no profile picture. It said, "Your girl's daddy isn't the only one watching you," with a gun emoji. My hands shook as I took screenshots of everything. We forwarded it all to Detective Holmes immediately. She called back within 10 minutes saying she'd contact Instagram to try tracing the account, but warned us these were usually dead ends. She suggested varying our routines and not posting our location on social media anymore. We spent the rest of the night sitting in silence, both of us finally understanding this wasn't going to end quickly. The anonymous message felt different from my father's drunken threats. This was calculated and specific. Someone was watching us closely enough to know Micah's Instagram handle. I kept thinking about my father's construction connections and all the shady people he'd bragged about knowing over the years. Micah triple checked the new locks before bed, but neither of us slept much. Every sound in the building made us both jump. The restaurant downstairs closed at 11, and after that, every footstep in the hallway felt like a threat. I lay there, thinking about how 6 months ago my biggest worry was making rent. and now I was afraid someone might actually hurt the person I loved most. Micah pulled me closer and whispered that we'd get through this together, but I could hear the fear in his voice too. Detective Holmes called Thursday morning with news about the Instagram threat. She'd tracked the account to an internet cafe 3 blocks from my father's country club, where someone paid cash for computer time. The security cameras showed a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses, but his face was never visible. She documented everything in her report and added it to our growing file of threats. Christopher met us at his office that afternoon with stacks of paperwork for the restraining order. He explained the judge would review everything in 3 weeks and we needed every piece of evidence organized perfectly. I signed forms until my hand cramped while Micah sorted the video files from the gallery. Christopher said, "Our case was strong, but warned us these things took time. We couldn't go back to our apartment that night. Detective Holmes suggested we stay somewhere different each night to break our patterns. The first night, we crashed at Gabriella's assistant's place in Brooklyn. The second night, we stayed with a couple Micah knew from his old job. By the third night, we were exhausted from packing and unpacking our bags. Every new place meant explaining our situation and seeing the fear in people's eyes. I hated making others nervous, but we had no choice. Monday morning, I went to my studio early to paint before anyone else arrived. The hallway was empty and quiet as I unlocked the door. A folded piece of paper lay on the floor just inside. My hands shook as I picked it up and unfolded it. 4 words in careful handwriting that looked exactly like my mother's. Family is forever. No signature or threat, but those 3 words made my stomach turn. I called Detective Holmes immediately, and she arrived within 20 minutes with evidence bags. She bagged the note carefully and asked about the security cameras. The building manager claimed the hallway cameras hadn't been working for 3 days, which seemed too convenient. Detective Holmes took the note for fingerprint and DNA testing while Gabriella argued with the building management about the broken cameras. Nobody could explain how someone got into a locked building without being seen. That afternoon, Delphine helped me create a safety plan during our session. We picked code words for different situations, like if I felt unsafe or needed Micah to come get me immediately. She mapped out 3 different routes from my studio to safe places and made me practice them in my head. We went through exit strategies for the gallery and our favorite coffee shop and the grocery store. She gave me a list of things to keep in my bag, like pepper spray and a portable phone charger and cash for emergencies. Having concrete steps made the fear more manageable. Art Forum wanted another interview, but this time Gabriella insisted on reviewing the questions first. The reporter agreed to focus on my new work and avoid family drama. During the interview, I talked about my paintings and what inspired each piece. When she asked about the gallery incident, I just said law enforcement was handling it and changed the subject back to art. The article came out 2 days later, focused mostly on my creative process. Then the internet decided I was the villain. Some blog twisted one quote about choosing love over prejudice into me saying all white families were racist. Within hours, my Instagram filled with hate messages calling me a race baiter and saying I deserved whatever happened to me. People claimed I staged the whole thing with my father for publicity. They said no real artist would use racial tension to sell paintings. Gabriella and Christopher worked all night getting the real quotes out there, but the damage was spreading faster than we could stop it. Comments on every art website claimed I was exploiting my boyfriend's race for fame. Micah found a community workshop for people dealing with stalking and threats. We sat in a circle with 8 other people in a church basement while a counselor explained safety basics. One woman had an ex who kept showing up at her job. A man talked about his former business partner making threats. Everyone had different stories, but the same tired eyes and nervous habits. We practiced scenarios and learned about documenting
When did you know?
evidence. The counselor gave us workbooks with charts for tracking incidents. After the workshop, we stayed for coffee and cookies with the group. Nobody judged us or questioned if we were overreacting. They understood the constant looking over your shoulder and checking locks 3 times. Sophie called Detective Holmes after thinking about it for days. She told her about Dad's connections to people who did dirty work for his construction company. She remembered names and dates from overheard phone calls. There was a guy who made problems disappear for the right price. Another one who specialized in following people and gathering dirt. Sophie gave Detective Holmes everything she could remember, even though she was shaking with fear about betrayal. Detective Holmes took pages of notes and said this established a clear pattern. My father had used intimidation before when business deals went bad. This wasn't his first time threatening someone who crossed him. The detective said Sophie's information would help build a stronger case for long-term protection. Christopher spent the next 3 days tracking down everyone who filmed the gallery incident and getting them to sign sworn statements about what they witnessed. He showed up at my studio with a stack of papers and 14 different video files on a USB drive, each one showing my father grabbing me and making his threats from different angles. The security footage from Gabriella's gallery cameras caught everything in high definition, including the audio of him saying Micah should watch his back because he had friends who handled problems. Christopher said, "This much evidence would make it impossible for my father to deny anything in court since every word was documented from multiple sources." I tried painting the next morning, but my hands kept shaking, and every stroke turned into another chain or cage or prison bar. No matter what I intended to create, the canvas I started as a landscape morphed into golden bars, stretching across a dark sky, and I threw my brush across the room in frustration. Hours passed with me, staring at blank canvases, unable to make a single mark that wasn't about being trapped or threatened or watched. By afternoon, I was sobbing on the studio floor, surrounded by half-finished paintings of cages and chains and locks, feeling like my creativity had been stolen along with my sense of safety. Delphine called that evening after Micah texted her about my breakdown and reminded me that trauma changes how we create art for a while. She said to paint whatever wanted to come out, even if it was just black paint smeared on canvas or the same image repeated 100 times, because keeping my hands moving mattered more than making something beautiful right now. 2 days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope from my father's lawyer filled with legal threats about defamation and demands that we stop spreading lies about the gallery incident. The letter claimed we were damaging his reputation while he fought federal charges and threatened to sue us for slander if we continued discussing what happened publicly. Christopher laughed when I called him panicking and drafted his own response, including links to all 14 videos showing exactly what my father did and said. He reminded them in formal legal language that truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and suggested any attempt to silence us would be seen as witness intimidation in his federal case. Detective Holmes called the next morning, saying she'd identified a man from my father's construction company who'd been hanging around our building 3 times that week, according to security footage from the bodega across the street. When officers questioned him, he claimed he was visiting a friend, but couldn't give the friend's name or apartment number, and got nervous when they asked for ID. She said they couldn't arrest him for standing on a public sidewalk, but now they had his name and photo to watch for. That night Micah sat me down and said I was pretending everything was fine when we both knew my father's threats were real and we needed better safety plans. We spent 2 hours creating protocols about never going anywhere alone and texting each other our locations every few hours and having code words if something felt wrong. The next morning, I told our downstairs neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, about the threats while buying coffee from their restaurant, and they immediately called their son Noah, who worked nights as a security guard. Within hours, the whole building knew our situation, and people started watching for strangers and checking if we were okay when we came home late. Mrs. Smith started keeping the restaurant door unlocked an extra hour after closing so we'd have somewhere safe to duck into if needed, and Noah began walking me to my car every night after his parents closed up. The Chinese delivery drivers who worked for them started texting Noah whenever they saw unfamiliar cars parked too long outside our building. An email arrived from a nonprofit about speaking on their panel about art and social justice next month with a small honorarium and travel expenses covered. I wanted to say yes because using my platform felt important, but being that visible terrified me when someone might be watching and planning something. Gabriella thought I should do it with proper security arrangements, and said she'd pay for professional guards if needed. Christopher came to our apartment 3 nights later with a briefcase full of documents to practice for the restraining order hearing, scheduled for next week. He made me repeat the facts over and over without crying or getting angry while he played devil's advocate, asking the worst questions my father's lawyer might ask. Every time I started explaining how I felt, he'd stop me and redirect to just facts about what happened, when and who saw it, and what exact words were said. Micah practiced too, since he'd be testifying about the threats. And Christopher taught him to stay calm, even when the questions got insulting or racist. We spent 4 hours going through every possible question until my voice was, and I finally understood how to separate my emotions from the evidence, even though actually doing it in court would be much harder. Sophie called the next morning with her voice shaking so bad I could barely understand her at first. She'd spent all night writing out everything she remembered about Dad's past threats and control tactics, and wanted Christopher to have it before the hearing. She kept saying she was scared, but couldn't watch him hurt me anymore, and hung up before I could thank her properly. Christopher picked up the statement himself that afternoon, and spent 2 hours with Sophie getting it notarized while she cried through most of it. He texted me later that her statement was powerful and included specific dates and incidents going back years that showed a clear pattern. Sophie sent me a text that just said she loved me, and to be careful because Dad had already heard what she'd done. 2 days later, Sophie forwarded me a long message from Mom claiming she had no idea about any threats against me or Micah. Mom wanted to talk and said she'd been trying to reach me but didn't have my new number, which a lie since Sophie had it. The message went on about how she was suffering too and needed her daughters to support each other during this difficult time. I started typing a response 3 different times, but Delphine's voice kept echoing in my head from our last session about not owing anyone access to my life just because we shared DNA. I deleted the draft and blocked the number Sophie had forwarded from. That night I showed Micah the message and he held me while I cried about wanting a mother who would choose me over her racist husband, just once. The night before the hearing, I couldn't eat dinner and kept pacing around our apartment, checking the locks over and over. Micah tried to get me to sleep, but I ended up in front of a small canvas at 3 in the morning with paint on my hands. My brush moved without thinking and created 2 hands reaching toward each other across empty space, but not quite touching. The fingers stretched and yearned, but that gap between them felt like miles of hurt and broken trust. It was the first thing I'd painted in weeks that wasn't angry or dark or full of chains. When the sun came up, Micah found me asleep at my easel with paint still wet on the canvas. The courthouse bathroom smelled like bleach and fear as I threw up my coffee 20 minutes before we had to go in. Micah rubbed my back and reminded me we had 12 videos and 14 witnesses ready to testify. Christopher met us outside the courtroom in his best suit carrying 3 boxes of evidence and gave me a bottle of water. The courtroom was smaller than I expected with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. My father sat at the other table in an expensive suit trying to look respectable, but his hands kept clenching and unclenching on the table. His lawyer was a thin man with glasses who kept whispering in his ear and shuffling papers. The judge was an older woman with gray hair pulled back tight, who didn't smile at anyone. Christopher had me sworn in first, and walked me through the gallery incident step by step, while the court reporter typed every word. Then he played the first video on a big screen and the whole courtroom went silent as my father's voice filled the room. Tell your boyfriend to watch his back because I still have friends who handle problems like him for the right price. The judge's face stayed neutral, but I saw her writing notes as the video played. Christopher played 3 more videos from different angles, all showing the same thing. My father grabbing my wrist, hard enough to leave bruises and screaming threats while security dragged him away. Each video made it clearer that this wasn't some misunderstanding or exaggeration. After the videos, Christopher submitted the witness statements and had me identify the bruises in the police photos. My father's lawyer stood up and immediately started suggesting I was being dramatic to help some made-up civil case for money. He asked if I'd been drinking at the gallery, and whether I'd provoked my father by refusing to help with his legal fees. He tried to make it sound like I was vindictive and making up threats that were really just a concerned father trying to protect his daughter. Christopher objected to half his questions, and when it was his turn to redirect, he simply played the videos again. He pointed out that 12 different people had recorded the exact same threats from different angles. He showed the judge screenshots of the anonymous messages and the police report about the man stalking our building. He had me describe finding the note under my studio door, and how the handwriting looked like my mother's. Detective Holmes took the stand next and went through everything in her flat cop voice that made it all sound even worse. She testified about the threatening Instagram message to Micah, and how it came from near my father's country club. She explained the pattern of escalation. From anonymous messages to direct confrontation to having someone watch our building. She'd interviewed Sophie and reviewed her statement about years of my father using threats and intimidation to control family members. She stated her professional opinion that the threat level was serious and getting worse, and that she believed Micah and I were in real danger. My father's lawyer tried to suggest the detective was overreacting, but she shut him down with facts and evidence. The judge asked a few questions about the timeline and whether my father had any history of violence. Holmes mentioned his connections to questionable people in his construction business and the ongoing federal investigation. The judge reviewed all the evidence for what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes. She looked at my father and told him his behavior was completely unacceptable and that the threats were specific and credible. She granted a 2-year protective order and said any violation would result in immediate arrest. She also noted there was enough evidence for potential witness intimidation charges related to his federal case. She warned him that if he came within 500 feet of me or Micah or tried to contact us in any way, he'd be prosecuted. My father's face turned purple and he started to stand up, but his lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. As we left the courtroom, someone from the district attorney's office stopped Christopher in the hallway. They'd been watching the hearing and wanted to open a separate investigation into witness intimidation. They assigned a prosecutor who specialized in organized crime and said they took threats against witnesses very seriously. My father might have been trying to scare me out of testifying in his federal case, and that was a whole different crime. The moment we got outside the courthouse, I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. My whole body shook as the adrenaline crashed, and I sobbed into toilet paper trying not to make noise. Everything we just won felt hollow because I was so tired of being scared all the time. Micah knocked gently and slid water and tissues under the door while I tried to breathe normally again. He reminded me we had real legal protection now and that my father couldn't hurt us without going to prison, but we both knew people like him had ways around protective orders. Gabriella called while we were still in the courthouse parking lot, saying she'd already heard about the ruling. She'd arranged a meeting for tomorrow with a security consultant who worked with celebrities dealing with stalkers and family violence. She wanted to go over new protocols for any public appearances and said she'd pay for professional security at all my events. The consultant would evaluate our apartment and help us with better safety measures. She said protecting her artists was part of her job and she took it seriously. The next morning, Deline sat across from me in her office and pulled up my phone while I watched her delete every news app. She showed me how to block keywords on social media so nothing about my family or the case would appear in my feeds. She had me write down 3 friends I trusted to screen any important articles and only tell me what I actually needed to know. She made me promise to stop reading comments on any posts about me because strangers' opinions were poison when I was already dealing with real threats. I handed over my laptop too, and she installed website blockers while explaining that protecting my mental space was just as important as the physical security measures. 2 days later, Sophie texted, asking if she could see my studio for the first time since everything happened with our father. I suggested we meet at a coffee shop near the gallery first to talk before going anywhere private together. She showed up 20 minutes early wearing sunglasses and a hat like she was hiding from someone. We sat in the back corner and I told her straight up we weren't discussing our parents or the case at all. She nodded and ordered tea with shaking hands while telling me she just wanted to see my art and understand who I'd become. We walked to the studio together in daylight with other people around, and she stood frozen in the doorway staring at all my paintings. She touched the canvas, showing the empty chair from Thanksgiving dinner, and started crying but didn't say anything about our parents. That weekend, Micah and I toured 3 apartments and buildings with doormen and security cameras everywhere. The second one had key fob access to every floor and a doorman who logged every visitor in a computer system. We signed the lease right there, even though it cost $800 more per month than our current place. The landlord ran our credit and handed over the keys within an hour, while we calculated how many paintings I'd need to sell to cover the difference. We spent the next day packing everything we owned into boxes and hiring movers to get us out fast. The new place had better locks and windows that actually sealed shut, and neighbors who minded their own business. Over the next 2 weeks, I started painting doorways instead of chains, while Micah measured each canvas for custom frames. He spent evenings in the living room cutting wood and sanding edges while I painted lights streaming through open doors. We worked side by side without talking much, but it felt good to create something together that wasn't about surviving. The doorway painting sold faster than anything I'd made before, and Gabriella said collectors loved the shift toward hope. My aunt dropped off a thick envelope from my mother that I recognized from the handwriting on the front. Inside were 3 pages of questions about my father's case and whether the prosecutor had contacted me about testifying. She didn't apologize or ask how I was doing, or mention missing me at all. I folded the letter back up and stuck it in my desk drawer without answering any of her questions. The panel about art and social justice happened 3 weeks later at a university downtown. 2 security guards stood at the back of the auditorium scanning the crowd while I talked about finding resources after family violence. I focused on practical stuff like finding lawyers who work on sliding scales and therapists who understand complex trauma.